Yeah, we are now.
And we're live. Okay. Hi, it's Martin here, and I'm here with a very rich source of knowledge about education and technology. And I'm just going to put him on the screen now, and he's going to introduce himself, and we'll take it from there. Bob.
All right. Morning, Martin. How are you? Thanks. You joined me on a really nice sunny day here in Manchester. There's my back garden. This is me working from home, and I suppose I'd better just say before we go, you and I ought to declare some conflict of interest. We've known each other for probably 12, 10 or 12, 13 years now. Like you, have spent most of my working life in further and adult education. I was a teacher, lecturer, vice principal, principal, and am now chair of governors of a college in the north called Northern College, which I'm very proud about because it provides adult learning and vocational and further education for disadvantaged adults. And I suppose some of the people who will be watching this, and some of you know, you'll have heard of Ruskin College in Oxford, where is the home of quite a lot of trade union leaders who went to do their studies there. Well, Northern College is in Barnsley, which is somewhat different to Oxford, I have to say, but still provides the same sort of service. And some of our ex-students, Mo Molam and David Blunkett and many others who work in politics and education. So I'm really proud of that. But the really interesting thing about that, Martin, is that, and I also should say and declare the interest that the reason that you and I know each other is you've been one of Toshiba's ambassadors because of the work that I do for Toshiba. Since I quit as a principal, I've worked for Toshiba as their strategic education advisor for Northern Europe now, not just the UK. And don't let that fool you, because I know absolutely very little about the techie bit of it. But that's because I don't really think this issue is about technology, Martin. I don't think this issue that we're talking about is about the kit. I actually think it's about mindset. I think it's about vision. I think it's about leadership. I think it's about culture. I think it's about governance. I think it's about policy. And and I think I'd like to put all that in this context. The reason I've deliberately chosen this, I don't think you can see this now. Is that?
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Can you see?
Yep.
Those are my beautiful grandchildren. I've actually got another one now, and there's another one on the way. And they, as I get to my stage of life, they're the important things in my life now, as well as me working, as well as this stuff and the work that I've done on FELTAG with Matthew Hancock, and the work that I'm doing on ETAG now with the current ministers. Although I have to say, without being too brutal about it, I'm not sure they're interested in anything else other than just getting re-elected at the moment. So I think we've hopefully FELTAG and ETAG will pick up where this ministers have left off when we've had a general election and we decide who's holding the next post. But I have to say,
Oh, hey, Bob.
and this
I'm
is,
really pleased that you
I don't
put.
know if people have ever heard of. Say again.
Oh, I was just going to say I was really pleased that you put a picture of young people in a forefront as well. You know, our future. This is what it's all about. It's a good
Well,
point, Bob.
absolutely, absolutely, and I have to say, and this is a tweet, one of my more famous tweets I got retweeted, and I have to say to any people who are watching this, if you're not on Twitter, you're missing out on probably the best tool for CPD that I've ever come across in over 40 years in education. So if the people who are watching or listening to this, if you don't get anything else other than get on Twitter, sign on, follow Martin King, Timecode, follow Bob Harrison Set, follow Stephen Heffel, follow a whole range of people, then at least you'll have got something out of this. But there's a reason that I put the grandkids up there, and it's because I've got more faith in teachers, I've got more faith in them, I've got more faith in technology than I have in politicians. And the reason that FELTAG came about was predominantly because of the lack of action by politicians over the last 4 years, the lack of action by the civil servant in BIS, and if I'm brutally honest, the complete and utter waste of money that organisations like ELSIS and BECTA, and to a lesser extent, and that's changing now, JISC, who, without being too unkind, have pissed multi-million pounds up the wall and left people on the ground still floundering. And if you wanted any better evidence than that, after all those hundreds of millions of pounds, the last Association of Colleges survey of the state of play in FE, and FE is much wider than colleges, of course. We've got work-based learners, and we've got adult and community education, everything like that. But the last survey was done in 2012, and it found that less than 30% of colleges were using technology effectively, and indeed that was because of that fact that was hindering and impeding the government achieving its policy aims. So the reason I put the grandkids up there is for this one simple reason, Martin. I love FE. I've been in FE all my life, and adult education. I'm passionate about it. I think it has the power and the potential to transform individuals and communities, and that's why I'm proud about Northern College, who's just got its second outstanding Ofsted. And particularly pleasing was the fact that they, in a building that was built in the 18th century, got praise for its use of technology, because it's not nothing to do with the technology particularly. It's to do with the attitude and the mindset of the leaders and the governors and the teachers, particularly the teachers, and I'm particularly proud of that. So the reason that I put the grandkids up is for this very simple reason. I want them to have the opportunity to attend a further education college when they leave school. Now, they leave school in 2025, 2027 and 2029. In fact, the latest one who just arrived, he'll leave in 2030, and there's one that won't be arriving, so I'll have 5 in May, and she, we know it's the she won't leave school until 2032. Now, what's the significance of that for further education, and what's the significance of that for your college and all the other colleges? Well, it's this. My guess, and you asked me the starting point for this question and this ramble, was the impact of technology and the future of education. Well, my view is Tommy, Millie, Bella and Hudson, we don't know the name of the 5th one yet, will leave schools that have no pens, no paper, no hard copy books, no pencils, no desks, no interactive whiteboards, no printers other than 3D printers. They will be used to gesture-based touchscreen technology. They'll be used to instant voice-to-text recognition, text-to-voice recognition. They'll be used to and expect learning and support for their learning anytime, anywhere, on any device. They'll expect instant feedback. They'll be used to, and the ability to be assessed at any time, and on-screen testing, on-screen formative assessment. They will be used to 3D, virtual and augmented reality, and their experience of school and college will be unrecognisable from the current provision that we make. Now, the challenge therefore for me, and that's why I've invested 2 years of my life, frankly, working with government departments and with agencies and quangos, which has been extremely frustrating for somebody who's used to, doing things and making things happen and then evaluating them. At times it's been like pushing treacle up a tree, when you're dealing with quangos and Ofsteds and Ofquals and skills funding agencies. Because the education system I've just described to you, the schools and the colleges that Millie and Tommy and Bella will be leaving, the mindset that we need to create the environment so Tommy and Millie and Bella will want to come and study in those places. Actually, they probably won't want to come into those places to study, Martin. They'll probably want to study like me and you are doing now,
right?
With some face-to-face. And don't get me wrong. Let me be right up front with this now, so everybody's really clear. Technology will never ever replace teachers. Okay, it can't do. It's not possible. Technology never teaches anybody anything. But teachers who use technology effectively will replace those who don't. It's as simple as that. So the challenge to the FE system and the policymakers is, how do we realign a post-industrial asset base, i.e. buildings and land and glass palaces and classrooms and boxes and atriums and refectories and gymnasiums and halls and stages and all those physical attributes that were designed in the post-industrial era. How do we realise those assets and then invest them in a workforce that's capable of using technology such as this, in a blend, so that the buildings and infrastructure that we do need is more fit for purpose for what you can actually do and what you need to do when you're face to face. Because my thesis and my proposition is, I don't know whether this is the case in your college, my proposition is an awful lot of what goes on in colleges at the moment and FE providers and in the classrooms could be done much more effectively and much more efficiently in a different way. That would then free up the time and the resource to focus on, if we have got a group of people in a room at a particular time, what are the skills that we need to develop in those people in order to make them more employable? I have a dreadful feeling that what goes on at the moment is still predicated in this mindset that learning is about a group of people coming together in a room at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday or a Wednesday morning with a particular tutor who stands up front with an interactive whiteboard and a PowerPoint and then talks. Now, I know, because I've been a principal of the vocational colleges, I've been vice principal of an engineering college. There's some terrific work goes on in vocational areas, some terrific practical work that goes on, and that still needs to happen. Some of the best examples of the use of technology I've seen have been in hair and beauty, have been in the creative industries, have been in cookery, chef, catering, those sort of things, and some of the poorest uses of technology I've seen have been in academic subjects. But I think the practice is so varied. I mean, I do a lot of work in colleges, and quite frankly, I can walk down a corridor of a faculty and I can see world-class practice in the use of technology on the left-hand side, and I can see, practice that got binned in the 1980s still going on the right-hand side. I kid you not, I've still seen OHTs being used. I've still seen flip charts being blue-tacked onto interactive whiteboards. On the same corridor, and on the other side of the corridor, I've seen hairdressing students, going onto YouTube or even doing Skype with students in other countries where hairdressing and the culture of hairdressing is completely different. So, I know this is getting a bit rambling and everything, but I think the underlying principle is this. My underlying thesis is this. That the current infrastructure, the current funding methodology, the current inspection methodology, the current assessment system is not to prepare our young and older people for the digital world and the generation that's coming. So, how do we take an asset base? And there was a classic last week, Martin, and I don't know if you saw it, but there's a classic indication and powerful evidence of what I'm talking about when FE Week broke a story about West Cheshire College, and I don't know if you saw it, but West Cheshire College decided 4 years ago to invest in a new 45 million, 50 million pound construction project building. The FE Commissioner's just been in, the principal's gone, the chair of governors have gone, They're having to sell the brand new building because it's got space that's not utilised. They've got a £45 million debt that's dragging them down. And quite frankly, if they don't sell it off quickly and invest in a different way of delivering learning, then it'll be one of the first FE colleges in the country actually to go bankrupt and go into administration, which I actually think there's going to be a lot more, unless we get this paradigm shift of thinking from policymakers, from governors, from principals. I actually think, in terms of the teachers, I spend a lot of time in colleges and around the country. There's a growing band of people, of innovators, of real enthusiasts, passionate. I can take you to a number of colleges. I've just been the judge for the Times Educational Supplement FE Awards, and the number of applications for the outstanding use of technology criteria, that prize this year, has shot up by about 200%. The quality of the applications and the quality of them, and I'm not going to tell you who's won, you'll have to wait until the end of February for the Times Ed to announce that, but I'm increasingly enthusiastic about what I see going on the ground. But I have to say that's usually despite the leadership and governance of the colleges, and it's because there's people like you, and because there's people like Rachel Challen at Loughborough, and there's people like at Reading College, and there's people like Youssef Fouda at Warwickshire College, and there's people at Croydon. There's lots of great practice going on, but that's despite a funding system that still reinforces the face-to-face industrial model of delivery. It's despite an inspection system that, quite frankly, most, from my experience, most Ofsted FE inspectors wouldn't know effective learning using technology if it slapped them in the eye. It's despite an audit system that still reinforces face-to-face delivery. And it's despite an assessment system that really, one of my often quoted things is the assessment tail wagging the pedagogical dog, because it just can't be right, can it? I mean, can you imagine Millie and Tommy and Bella sitting down to do their assessment for their, whatever qualification it is, by writing for an hour and a half or 2 hours on an A4 piece of paper? I mean, it's just laughable, just unthinkable. So we've got all these cultural inhibitors stopping people like you, stopping lots of a whole band and growing band and movement of people within colleges, young and older, innovators who are saying, listen, we need to focus on using technology for learning, not technology for teaching. But the inspection regime doesn't, and the management doesn't support that. The management is micromanagement, and it's particularly, about targets and things. And I think we're focusing on the wrong things. And if you look at our spend and how much Vector and ELSIS and JISC, the spend and the capital spend that your college has made and others, the spend has predominantly been at the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy of learning. What we've done is we've focused on the spend of technology for teaching, not technology for learning. So what we have is, I often do this. I do this quite often with head teachers, and I'm working with head teachers. I'll say, how many of you? It's the same challenge in schools, incidentally. How many of you have got interactive whiteboards in every classroom? And if you get a group of head teachers together in a room, usually a lot of them are male, particularly secondary, the testosterone levels go up, so that they're very keen to get their hands up in the air very quickly. I then usually follow it by this question: why? Why have you got interactive whiteboards in every classroom? And I kid you not, Martin, and I must have done it 30, 40 times this presentation, there is the silence that follows that question. Why? And eventually Ray Saul will say, well, because it improves teaching and learning. And my follow-up question is, does it? How do you know? Because you and I both know, and you've heard me say this before, there's not one scrap of evidence anywhere in the world. Incidentally, this is why I never get invited to speak at Smart and Promethean events. But there is not one scrap of evidence anywhere in the world that interactive whiteboards has ever had any impact on learning whatsoever. So my thesis is the system we've got is not fit for purpose. The Feldtag themes that we've identified are trying to loosen up the cultural inhibitors. We need to focus on our technology spend about technology for learning, and that in itself, rather than technology for teaching. And if we can use technology to empower and liberate learners, well, that demands a tremendous paradigm shift and skills and knowledge and understanding on behalf of the workforce. So my view would be, if somebody like you or your principal e-governors came to me and said, well, I've just had this conversation at the governing body at Northern College, where we've had the estates manager wanted to spend £1.5 million putting a roof on at the old barn, which needs, it's leaking, and we're up on a big hill in Barnsley, and we need a new roof and everything like that. Well, I disagree fundamentally. I think we need to spend £1.5 million on improving the skill set of the workforce, making sure the teachers understand how they can support learning wherever the learners are. I think we should spend the money making sure our broadband connection is super fast. And I think we should make sure that we spend £1.5 million on making sure the Wi-Fi within the institution and within the community, if we can, is as resilient and as robust as possible. Because, again, the mind shift is, and the West Cheshire College example proves this, the old idea of build it and they will come, I'm afraid, is wrong. It's gone. It's not going to be build it and they will come. It's going to be how do we engage, how do we provide access, and then how do we support learners wherever learners may be. Now, that may include them coming for some face-to-face, or for us going. Let's say it's in the workplace. Why can't the FE tutors go and support learners in the workplace? Why do they have to come? I mean, I first started teaching in the mid-70s, and I went into FE in the 80s, late 70s, 80s. We didn't have to worry about engaging with students, because on the 9th of September every year, there'd be, queues of young men from the steel industry and the engineering industries would be queuing round the block to sign up and enroll. So, those days are long gone, and that was when our system was fit for purpose, because it was predicated on an industrial mechanized process. That's not the case anymore. So, my real fear is, unless FE policymakers, unless FE governors, unless FE principals, unless the Skills Funding Agency, unless Ofqual, unless Ofsted, unless all those inhibitors really start to understand the paradigm shift that they've got to make in thinking, to say, how do we have a system that will support learning rather than a system that will support teaching predicated on a particular model, which I'm afraid is not fit for purpose for the new year. That was a dreadfully long ramble.
Okay, Bob. Yeah, there was so much in there. I've learned something new. That was really quite useful, what you've just said there about Bloom's taxonomy and the investment at the base. And I've made a note of that, and I thought that was a good analogy there. And the story about the college and the £45 million spend on their new build, I think that maybe, I'm not sure if that's a tipping point. Now, that story might represent a tipping point in the discussions about education and technology, how that old model of build the palace, as it were, build the space, and spend the money on it, it's maybe that's the end of could be almost the end of an era of thinking. And
well, I agree. I agree with you. And if you want a more an even more recent, and well, not more recent than West Cheshire, but this last summer, I spent most of the summer travelling 3 and 4 times a week to see my mum, who was had been housebound and bedbound. She was 86 and she lives in Rochdale, and I live in Manchester. Now, there are two dimensions to this, I think, which illustrate my point. So bear with me. The first one is the last 12 months, 18 months of my mum's life, when we took the car off her, when she got so frail, she was dangerous. So she went into a hospice for some respite, and when she came back, me and my brother had sold the car, which was devastating for her. But we replaced one technology with another piece of technology. So when she came home, we gave her an iPad and a wireless network. Now, to the day she died, she never knew she had a wireless network. All she knew was if she pressed on this and she pressed there, her grandchildren would come up on FaceTime. She also could send electronic Christmas cards to all her friends because of her arthritis. So the last 18 months of her life, Martin, she lived through a piece of technology. And the last 6 months of her life, she was bedbound. And God bless her, and this is absolutely true. When I wheeled her into the hospice for the very last time in the summer, she was clutching onto her iPad. And as I wheeled her in and we got her settled in her room, and the nurse came and they explained everything to her, God bless her, the nurse said, right, Doreen, you've got everything now and you're settled, and your son's going to stay with you now. Have you got any questions? And my mum said, yes, what's the Wi-Fi password, please?
It's a wonderful story.
Well, it's absolutely true. But the reason I'm telling you is I have to go to see her sort of every day, every other day, well, because I wanted to. But I used to drive past Rochdale College, which is called Hopwood Hall College, right? And Rochdale Sixth Form College, which has been built, cost, I don't know, £12 million. It was built 2 years ago, 100 yards away from Hopwood Hall College. So we had Hopwood Hall College, which has just had a £10 million refurb. All the cladding is done outside. And then, because one was funded by the Skills Funding Agency, Hopwood Hall College, right? The Sixth Form College was funded by a different branch of government. And every day that I drove past, right the way through from June, middle of June, till my mum died, went into the hospice in the end of September, Martin, both those buildings were empty for 100% of the time.
Mm.
Now, even when I drive past now to see my brother or to go and watch my beloved Rochdale Football Club on Saturday, well, they're empty on Saturdays as well. But if I go midweek, even midweek, I bet there's less than 30% occupancy of both those buildings. Now, the key question and the big issue for the Skills Funding Agency, and I feel passionate about this because this is, legacy, it's about taxpayers' money, it's about efficiency, it's about effectiveness. Those buildings are tying up valuable assets that could be invested in a workforce, that could be invested in a technology infrastructure, they could put a free Wi-Fi system over the whole of Rochdale. They could provide tablets or devices for the whole of the children who leave school in Rochdale for the same amount of money that they've invested in that new building. Now, the Skills Funding Agency are currently working on the mechanisms by which it will allow currently capital assets. Okay, if you sell off land and buildings, then those capital assets, there's only a certain percentage of that goes back to the FE provider, and a lot of it goes back to the Treasury. Now, I think that's wrong. I think since incorporation, your assets should be your assets. And if you want to sell off a building I mean, how many big city colleges, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, London, how many of those big city colleges, how many buildings have they got? How many pieces of land have they got? You know, many of them don't even know how many buildings they've got and everything. So my view is, what the next government needs to do is to, and the Skills Funding Agency, is work out a mechanism where we can have half as many providers, half as many glass palaces, half as many colleges, but twice as many learners, and even more teachers. What, you know, my view is, and I think the previous minister Matthew Hancock's view was, that this was not about cost cutting. This is not about efficiency. This is about effectiveness. We could have twice as many learners and half as many providers, but that means we need to realign the asset base that was designed in the late 20th century for one that's fit for purpose for the third millennium.
Hey Bob, have you heard of scale-free schools? Have you heard of that at all?
No, say again. What's it called?
Well, a couple of years via Twitter, of course, I came across some people working on something called scale-free schools. What they did was to use the resources in communities, and so instead of having a school building, they would use public libraries, swimming pools, cafe,
Yeah.
you know, and they would use the community to do that. I thought this is quite an interesting model for what might be, you know, 2025 or earlier, you know, where you're outside, so you free up the assets that you were talking about that are buried in the bricks and mortar.
Well, it's interesting. I've known you a long time. And you are, you know, always have had this anarchist view and this underpinning anarchist values, and I could see why that might appeal to you. And I think there are examples of it. I mean, let me float this word then alongside that, because I understand what you're saying, and I've studied virtual schools. I've been over to Stanford University. I go over there every year and look at what's going on. I've looked at the virtual charter school movement and all its flaws. I've looked at the Stanford Virtual High School. And of course, I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of the people at Stanford that were behind the MOOC movement. Now, let me get this dead clear straight away. I think the word MOOC has now become a hindrance. It's a red herring, because, you know, all the research tells us that the MOOCs that MIT and Stanford and Harvard and Oxford and Open University run future learning in this country, that they are dominated by people who've already got degrees, people who are highly qualified and everything like that. But I think that's missing the point, Martin. And I think there is a profound point of issue here for further education. Let's forget the word MOOC, the brand name word MOOC, massive open online courses, and let's think about the underlying principles of a MOOC, which is, instead of knowledge being held by an elite few and the access to that knowledge predicated on whether you can pay for it or whether you've got access to it or everything, instead of that, the principle, forget MOOC, put the title down, it's not helpful. The potential that technology has, with support and with some face-to-face, to engage, to provide access, to support, to progress, to assess, to give feedback, the potential of technology to do things at scale. And, you know, here's a plug for one of the trusts that I sit on the board of. I'm on the board of the UFI Trust, and the UFI Trust has got £54 million, which it's currently investing in technology in further and vocational and adult education. And if any of you are interested, www.ufi.co.uk. We're anxious to support innovation. So if there's any colleges or providers that would like some money to innovate, and there are three basic principles to get access to that money. One is, it has to be vocational or adult education. Okay. The second principle, it has to involve the use of digital technology. And the third principle has to be scalable. So it has to be scalable and it has to be sustainable. So if you look at the MOOC model, but don't get trapped into thinking MOOC means astrophysics for but think about what is the potential of that technology. Because I know, just in the Stanford area, in Silicon Valley, the principle underpinning MOOCs is now being used to provide maths and literacy for Hispanic students, predominantly in that Silicon Valley in between San Francisco and San Jose. Now, that doesn't get a lot of the publicity because Stanford are more interested in the high-level stuff and everything like that. But the potential that there is there is absolutely phenomenal. And so, you know, going back to my original thesis, we need to realign the asset base of our current vocational further adult education system from one which is predicated on a post-industrial model, essentially a mechanized Taylorism of process that, you know, resources go in at one end, there's a factory, and then you test them and then you spit them out at the other end.
And behaviorism as well.
And behaviorism as well. Absolutely, absolutely. So we need to realign that base, and that needs an enormous effort at a number of levels. And that's why I'm very proud. You're not crying now, are you?
No.
I'm not. I'm very proud of the work of the Feldtag Group, which I was privileged to be a part of. And whilst I might disagree with Matthew Hancock's underlying political ideology, I have to say he's the 19th FE and Skills Minister I've worked with in my 40 years in education. He's the first one that, one, listened, and secondly, understood the issues and the potential that technology, and that may be because of his background and his business background and his family business background, which is technology based. So not only did he listen, not only did he understand, but he then made something happen. Now, all right, people might turn around and say, yeah, but he didn't give us any money. Well, frankly, I get the advice I gave him was they don't need the money. The money's there. It's just tied up in the wrong assets.
Yeah, sometimes money can be a problem, can't it? You get money and it makes it unsustainable because you get money.
Well, you lived through Vector and Elsys and you know and what it created. MoleNet. You remember MoleNet?
Yeah.
And of course, what it created, Martin, was a dependency culture. Was, oh, well, we can't do anything until they give us a drop. We can't do anything until there's some project funding. Well, that's wrong. You can do something, and colleges and providers can do something, but they need to shift their paradigm. They need to move away from this idea. And I think one of the phrases that I'm most proud of in my life was the words in the Feldtag report, which came from a little think tank group of people that we put together here in my back room in Manchester, which was the Skills Funding Agency needs to realign the funding methodology from one which currently rewards learning by physical attendance to one that rewards learning by learning presence. Now, that's a massive realignment of a whole range of things. You know, we've got to start somewhere, and I think if you examine those Feldtag things, I do an exercise, and I'm happy to come down and do it with your college or any providers who watch this. I do an exercise where when I'm working with senior management teams or governors or whatever, a range of colleges to provide us together, where I get the 6 Feldtag themes, and then I ask groups of people. It might be something you could try with if you do a staff development day. I asked them to rank order the Feldtag themes. And if you remember the Feldtag themes, the number 1 is horizon scanning, then there's, I think, workforce development, then there's infrastructure and funding, then there's leadership and governance, then there's learners and learning technology, then there's employers and employer engagement. You know, so there's 6 of them, and I say, okay, 10 minutes. I want you for your to rank order which you think is the most important. Because the answer is they're all important. There is no one that's more important than the other, and it's a case of having a systematic approach to how do we improve horizon scanning leadership and governance? How do we improve infrastructure, technological infrastructure? How do we affect the assessment and accountability system to make it more supportive? How do we improve the skills of the workforce? How do we engage with learners and employers? Ask yourself this: up here in Manchester, the growth in SMEs in tech startups is phenomenal. You know, look at Silicon Roundabout down where you are. Now, my challenge would be, what's the relationship between FE providers and that emerging ed tech startup community? And from my experience, Martin, it's very, very limited.
Yeah, something else to take away from this as well, Bob, is talking about, again, it's back to the idea of the old model of space is empty, isn't it? Until people populate it. And you talked about the institutions being inhibitors so often now. If they could only be amplifiers, and it all comes through people. I just interjected there a little while, because yeah, to make that happen, you need technology. Can't do it on its own, can it? You need people to make the connections to the industry, to the providers, to the learners, to the teachers. You need people to make the connections, and technology can help you make the connections, but it can't do it on its own.
Absolutely. I think it will be absolute folly, and I think the tweet I put out last week, which was in the follow-up to the Los Angeles iPad Pearson disaster, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute if you want, which said, throwing technology at a broken system is not going to do anything. And I think a lot of schools at the moment are falling into the trap of thinking, one-to-one devices, let's give every kid an iPad, It's a disaster waiting to happen, and the disaster in Los Angeles is a classic, absolute classic of how not to do it, which is, the superintendent, and this, some people are going to go to jail for this, because, it's the same sort of thinking, Martin, that's got West Cheshire College into the financial dire straits that it is, which is this. Right, okay, we know what's best for kids and teachers. So what we did, and this is what Los Angeles did, the school superintendent went to see Apple and Pearson and said, right, listen, I think if we give every child in these however many schools in the most difficult areas of Los Angeles, give them an iPad, preloaded with all the Common Core, which is what they've got in the United States, and preloaded with the assessment tests, right? Then, okay, that sounds a good idea. Pearson have got the contract for doing all the content, so they've preloaded them with content and with the assessment test. Apple, you can imagine the smile on the Apple salesman's face when the school superintendent said, can we have 30,000 iPads? Of course you can, yeah, just sign here. Sadly, they didn't consult with the teachers, they didn't consult with the learners. They decided to go ahead. They borrowed the money on the markets because it was a bust, and they threw 30,000 iPads at the most disadvantaged schools in Los Angeles. Result? Well, for a start-off, 80% of the teachers said they had no training for the teachers. So 80% of the teachers said, we don't want these, this is a distraction, it's not going to help. They ignored that. 70% of the schools didn't have enough Wi-Fi, broadband capacity to cope. So whenever more than 10 kids logged on with their iPads, when they opened the boxes and set them up, the Wi-Fi systems crashed, okay? Even better, and this is, I think gives me great faith in humanity and children and their ability to be entrepreneurial and creative. A few children, within minutes, hacked into the security settings in Apple, in the iPad, which you know are not that great. And you know, if you want secure devices, I wouldn't particularly buy Apple. But that's mainly because I work for Toshiba. So let's just get that conflict of interest out, shall we, before we go any further. But 3 kids worked out how to hack the security systems, and then, this is the brilliant bit, they then put on eBay, you could buy the tips to make sure you could hack the security systems, and they made $50,000 in the space of about a week, selling at $10 a time the tips to hack into the Apple iPads. Now, if that's how, if you want a lesson of how not to use technology, because they've had to take all the iPads back. You know, I think they've now gone back into schools and they've reinforced the. But you know, think about the opportunity cost of what's happened there. So what I'm saying is this is not about technology, because we need to be shifting the culture that will cope with whatever the technology brings. You're old enough to remember when a floppy disk was seen as the future.
Yes.
You're old enough to remember when we got BBC Micros in and we thought, oh, this is going to revolutionise teaching. You know, you're old enough to remember, in fact you probably were one of them, of those IT guys who saw it as a status symbol to walk around with a USB stick around your neck just to show, you know, how cool you were. Now, you know, the issue is, how do we prepare our institutions to cope with them?
That's a great point to end on, Bob, I think.
Okay.
That's
All right,
brilliant.
well, it's been a pleasure talking, so I hope it's been a ramble. Presumably you'll be able to edit it down a bit and remove any expletives. But it's nice to talk to you again. Hopefully I'll see you again soon, and I hope this is helpful for you. You started off in our conversation this morning saying you'd been asked